Just let me go. I'll leave. I'll never come back. Please. Please help me. I didn't do anything wrong. You don't have to do this. I won't take. I
The film opens with Missy driving alone on a highway. She spots a stalled truck and a man standing in front of it, finds him attractive, and stops to offer assistance. He explains his truck broke down and, when asked his name, introduces himself as Joe. Missy offers him a ride, he accepts and brings her to his home. Once they arrive, passion quickly escalates and they begin kissing in the car. Seeking more privacy, Missy suggests getting a room. Joe, attempting to impress her, claims his family once ran a thriving winery and, with a sly smile, invites her inside for a private tour. The next scene reveals her tied up in the factory, pleading for her life, before a figure with large shears approaches and brutally slits her abdomen, killing her. It is then revealed that Joe is a serial killer who has murdered multiple people at the winery. The narrative then shifts to Tess, a single mother who returns to the vineyard with her son Walter after her father's death. Tess intends to sell the property, which her father left to her, despite a strained past and abuse she suffered there as a teenager. On arrival, she reconnects with her Aunt Margaret, who warmly greets her and introduces Joe, explaining that he was abandoned at the vineyard as a child and later adopted by Tess's father. Joe accompanies Tess and Walter into the house, where Tess becomes visibly uncomfortable as the residence evokes dark memories. Walter, by contrast, happily explores. That evening Tess's lawyer informs her of her options: keep the property, transfer ownership to Margaret, or sell it. Tess insists on selling so she can use the proceeds to buy a city home and offer Walter a better future. Margaret feels betrayed and, confiding in Joe, laments that she and her family will receive nothing. Joe reassures her that Tess might change her mind. Later, after tucking Walter into bed and answering his question about selling the house, Tess explains she endured significant pain there and does not wish to relive it. She sees no value in keeping the vineyard for Walter. Haunted by a nightmare of her father's abuse, she wakes in a panic. The following morning Tess brings Walter to see Joe, who is chopping wood in a barn where Tess remembers her mother died by suicide. She chooses not to tell Walter. Tess asks Joe to watch Walter for a while, and Joe shows Walter how to chop wood. Meanwhile, Tess retrieves the property documents and house keys from Margaret's mailbox and, as the new owner, begins exploring the estate. She struggles to open one particular door. At that moment, Sheriff John arrives at Margaret's house investigating the disappearance of Missy, who was last seen in the area. He shows Margaret a photograph, which she denies recognizing, and asks whether Joe might have seen Missy. In the shed, Joe lies and claims never to have met her. As the sheriff prepares to leave, he recognizes Tess as a former classmate. Pleased to see her, he learns she has returned to sell the property and later asks her to dinner, to which she replies they will meet soon. Back at the barn, Joe points out some peacocks to Walter, praising their long, colorful tails. Their attention is abruptly diverted when a wild animal enters the peacock enclosure and attacks a chicken. Joe leads Walter closer to the injured chicken and tells him it must be put out of its misery. Walter hesitates and asks how. Joe instructs him to snap the bird's neck. When Walter cannot bring himself to do it, Joe performs the act, and together they bury the animal. While digging, Joe reminisces that, at Walter's age, he used to watch movies with Margaret. Walter eagerly says he would like to watch a movie with his grandmother, and Joe promises they will one day. Later, Joe brings Walter into the vineyard and produces a knife to teach him how to cut away rotten parts of the vines. Tess arrives and cautions Joe to be careful so Walter does not injure his fingers. Joe explains the harvest process, describing how grapes are crushed in a machine to extract juice. When Walter notices stains on the crusher and asks about them, Joe dismisses them as grape juice. After washing himself, Joe is visited by 4 friends. 1, Roger, who is openly gay, shows immediate interest in Joe. The others leave, and Joe agrees to show Roger the winery. During the tour, Roger seduces Joe with a massage and a kiss. Joe recoils and insists they should not be doing this, yet he leads Roger further into the factory, into the very room where Missy was killed. As Roger approaches, a flashback triggered by memories of Margaret's abusive behavior while watching films overwhelms Joe, and he violently assaults Roger. Disturbed by his actions, Joe goes outside to wash off the blood and then confesses to Margaret. Unmoved, Margaret scolds him for repeatedly creating problems, warns that no one will care for him once she is gone, and orders him to leave. She then enters the factory and gruesomely slashes Roger's abdomen, killing him as she did Missy. Walter hears Roger's screams and reports them to Tess, who dismisses the noise as a bad dream. After Margaret returns and instructs Joe to dispose of the body, Joe dismembers Roger, feeds the remains into the crusher until they become mulch, buries the evidence, and meticulously cleans the scene. The next morning, Sheriff John arrives investigating Roger's disappearance after a friend filed a missing person report. He questions Tess and Margaret and later visits Joe's camper, where Joe feigns illness and avoids him. Both Margaret and Joe deny knowing Roger, arousing the sheriff's suspicion. That evening, Sheriff John accepts Tess's invitation to dinner. Over drinks he admits a long-standing affection for her. Tess, moved by the conversation, reveals the abuse she endured from her father, the pregnancy that resulted from it, and the morning she discovered her mother's suicide in the shed. The confession deepens the emotional stakes as the Vineyard's hidden violence remains concealed. Unable to bear the horror any longer, Tess's mother took her own life. A few months later, Tess gave birth to a stillborn child. Her aunt secretly buried the baby. After recovering, Tess fled home to escape her father's abuse. Sheriff John, shocked, attempts to comfort her by singing briefly before leaving. Unbeknownst to them, Joe has been eavesdropping on their conversation. Margaret, meanwhile, reflects on her own history of abuse at the hands of her brother, which explains why she never married and why he left her nothing in his will. The next morning, Joe takes Walter to tend the chickens and later brings Tess to the factory to show that he still makes wine. Tess tastes some and enjoys it. Joe impulsively kisses her and they begin to make out. Walter walks in, is disturbed, and runs away. Tess chases him to reassure him, while Joe, angry at the interruption, smashes a wine basket with a hammer, storms outside, and drives off to cool down. Distressed, Walter tells Tess he does not want to stay. Tess comforts him, promising they will sell the property and leave. Margaret informs Tess she is also leaving and invites them to a final dinner. Sheriff John receives a call from a woman asking about Roger, who had been dropped off at the Vineyard. She mentions Joe, confirming John's suspicions and prompting him to head to the estate. That evening, Margaret prepares dinner for Tess and Walter, but both suddenly faint. Margaret has drugged their meal intending to kill them and claim the property. She locks Walter in a stable and drags Tess to the factory, gagging and binding her with a noose. When Tess regains consciousness, Margaret accuses her of abandoning their father and returning only for money, insisting she is the rightful heir after caring for the estate. Margaret tells Tess Walter is alive but threatens to kill him if Tess refuses to sign the papers. Sheriff John arrives to investigate as Joe returns home, noticing Missy's car. He realizes Joe lied to him and begins searching. He hears muffled screams from the factory, rushes in, and finds Walter bound and left to die. John frees Walter and attempts to escape, while Margaret reveals a shocking truth to Tess. Joe is not an adopted son but Tess's biological child, the product of their father's abuse. Margaret had lied about the baby being stillborn, saved the child, and raised him in secrecy. Horrified, Tess understands she had been intimate with her own son. As John and Walter try to flee, Joe attacks John. A brutal fight leaves both men injured. Joe gains the upper hand and impales John with a pitchfork, killing him. Mortally wounded, Joe collapses. Walter seizes the chance to free Tess. Margaret tries to intervene, but Tess strikes her with a stone, killing her. Joe regains consciousness, sees Margaret dead, and, enraged, attempts to strangle Tess. Walter takes a grape cutter from Joe's pocket and slits Joe's throat, killing him. Tess and Walter leave the Vineyard together. The film concludes by noting it is inspired by the true Wineville chicken coop murders of 1926 to 1928, in which young men who arrived in Wineville disappeared and a 19-year-old farmer was later revealed to have tortured and murdered several victims. That is the story of the film. Please share your thoughts in the comments.